Tim, at least he didn't go up and say, "You've obviously worked for carnivals your whole life. Can you get me a job?" For those of you who were here last week, Angie, among the many things he said, one of the things he said was, we don't need to complicate spirituality. And I'm going to complicate it today. Sorry. I'm not going to actually complicate the spirituality part. It's the path to get there, because somehow we've got to get ourselves to that point where we can recognize, we can know our spirituality. And the path I'm going to take today is physics. Now, when I talk about physics, Gene always tells me to keep it simple. And as I've looked at this talk, I mean, the best I can tell, as long as you have maybe a doctorate in subatomic physics, you'll be fine with the talk. The ideas really are very simple. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the problem with physics. You know, physics, when you get to this higher theoretical physics, is about explaining how our physical world works. And there are two theories that dominate it. One of them is relativity theory, which I know you've all heard of from Albert Einstein. And relativity theory, again, has been tested numerous times. Virtually all of it shows that it's correct. And relativity theory tells us how the world works that we can see, in effect. Maybe from the smallest bug to galaxies. And it works perfectly well to describe that. And when it was set, everybody thought, well, that describes everything. Not just everything we can see, but everything. And so when they discovered the basic structure of an atom, so let's take the simplest atom, a hydrogen atom. It has one proton with one electron around it. And they said, well, it works just like everything else we see. And so here you have the proton, and the electron is this little teeny ball that circles it, much like the moon circles the Earth. But then along came quantum theory. Quantum theory describes everything from about molecules on down to atoms and below atoms. And it describes a world that's totally different and totally weird. But yet, it's been tested over and over and over, thousands of times. Everything they've been able to test has always shown that it's correct. And what it tells us is the electron is not a little ball circling the proton. The electron is a probability cloud. It doesn't exist in any one place. It just possibly exists all around the proton. Now, that's how it works, and yet, if you measure it, and there are devices we can use to measure it, once you measure it, the electron will be in one place. Now, beforehand, it's not that we don't know where it is, it's that it isn't in a particular place. But if you measure it, it will be in one place. Now, if that applied to our lives, then later in the week, everybody's gone. If Angie was in this building and I was standing outside and Tim came up to me and he said, "Where's Angie?" And I said, "Well, he's in the church there." And he said, "Well, where in the church?" I would say, "Well, everywhere." His essence kind of permeates the whole church. And Tim would say to me, "Oh, well, that doesn't help because I have to give him something." And I would say, "Well, that's okay, because when you go in there and look for him, he'll be in one spot." That's the reality of quantum physics. And the problem that physicists have is that their mathematics describe this cloud of probability. And their mathematics describe what happens after you've measured it, and now it's only one ball of electron. What they don't figure out, what their mathematics cannot explain, is why consciousness is required to do that. It exists only as a probability cloud, but if a consciousness measures it, it suddenly is in one place. And science has no explanation for that. And I know because a very good friend of Gene and I is one of the world's best subatomic particle physicists, and he says what he's working on is how to get consciousness out of this equation, but they can't do it. I think there's a bigger problem, though, in physics. Because if consciousness is required to do this, well, think about it. We had the Big Bang. We had this one energy that turns into matter, and then you have hydrogen atoms form. And then they pull together through gravity, they create suns. And inside those suns, two hydrogen atoms have to come together in a very particular way to form helium. Except if the hydrogen atoms aren't in a particular place, if they're only probabilities of being somewhere, then how do they come together to form the helium? Is the helium only probably there? Except if it's only probably there, you need 3 helium atoms to form carbon. And they have to come together in a very particular way. And yet, they're only possibly there. And then it goes on to form oxygen and nitrogen and everything that makes us and makes the planets and makes people. And yet, the only explanation is they're probably there. There's no consciousness to make them in a particular place. Now, science has 2 answers to this, 2 theories. One of them is it's all just random chance. Hundreds of things have to go precisely, correctly, in order to result with human beings on a planet, and yet the only answer is it was just chance. We are the children of the greatest winning streak ever. The other theory is the multi-universe theory. So if Jenny's sitting up here and drops a quarter and it lands on heads, this theory says, well, yes, it did land on heads, but it could have landed on tails, and so another universe is created where it landed in tails. And so for 14 billion years, every time something could have happened, either way, both of them happened and created a new universe. And so there are an infinite number of universes out there. Neither of those are good answers. They're theories because nobody can come up with something better. But luckily for you, you get to exist because I have better theories. I have 2 of them, just like they do. The first one I just came up with, and I think it's brilliant. Gene told me maybe it's not the best a little bit. I think the Divine Mother laid an egg. And that's the universe. And the evolution of it is just the development of another divine being. And we're all DNA particles of this divine being that will eventually, the universe will hatch into another divine being. It's a brilliant concept. And probably about 10 billion years from now, we'll be able to figure out if it's correct or not. My other theory is the one I mentioned last time. And that's the concept that in the Big Bang, which is fully accepted by physicists, one energy sprang forth to create the universe, and then it divided up into the 4 known physical energies, and I said then, it actually divided into 5 energies, and the other one was spiritual energy. Now, if you have your calendar here, you may want to pull it out and mark this time, date. Because something's going to happen that will probably not happen again in your lifetime. Gene doesn't always agree with this, but I'm going to tell you I was wrong. But I know a bunch of you are saying, no, that's not possible. Bob could not have been wrong. But I was only partly wrong, which means I'm partly right, so we're okay. Spiritual energy is like the other energies. It's an energy field. It has a vibrational level, but it's different. And that difference is what created our universe. Because spiritual energy had within it the blueprint for our universe. Angie and I have been discussing this theory. It had within it the blueprint. So when atoms could have formed hydrogen, but it's just chance whether they did, this blueprint allowed that to happen. When hydrogen could have formed helium, but it's only random chance, this blueprint was in place for it to happen. But this isn't like a regular blueprint. A few hundred years ago, in the Enlightenment period, they came up with a concept of the clockwork universe. And what they said was, here's all these laws of how the universe runs. Gravity, the laws of motion, thermodynamics. And God created those laws. And God sort of wound up the universe and set it going, and now it just runs, and divine aspect is totally unneeded. But what this says is it's not a clockwork universe, because the blueprint of spiritual energy is more like a computer software program that evolves with the universe. So it's not that everything is predetermined, but rather that this blueprint evolves with the universe itself. And where does that leave us? Because remember, consciousness is required. And when I talked about my theory of spiritual energy last time, somebody asked me a question about spiritual particles. Who asked that? One of you asked it, didn't you? Oh, okay. You can admit it, it's all right. It was a brilliant question. You see, all energy also has particles. Electricity is an electron, light is a photon, you have gravity, you have a graviton. And he asked me, if spirituality is an energy, where's its particle? And I didn't have an answer. But now I do. Because the particle, remember what matter is condensed energy. Einstein showed us this. E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. It means that energy and mass are the same thing. Mass is, in effect, condensed energy. So what is condensed spiritual energy? It's our consciousness. Our consciousness is not our link to spiritual energy. Our consciousness is condensed spiritual energy. And that is the root of who we are, as Tim was talking about. Our true selves are this evolution of spiritual energy into this condensed form. And in the